Hi, and welcome to this live reading from the 4 R's series by Julie Castle. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Fool's Gold, Chapter 1. You're going to do what? Sarah Maxwell gazed at her cousin's mutinous expression, willing her to understand. Rafe's reputation has been in shreds since I left. I need, deep in my soul, to set things right. Please try to understand, Pippi. I must go back. Back into the lion's den. Pippi shook her head. Listen to me, cousin. You'll be going on a fool's errand. You don't think the man will take you back with open arms after you deserted him on your wedding night 6 months ago, do you? Rafe's housekeeper is going on a long-deserved vacation. I'm all set to fill in for her at the ranch. So she's the one who's been feeding you all these gloom and doom stories about him. Pippi scowled. It could be a setup, you know. No, Rafe's not that devious, Sarah added sadly. He can't even tell a decent white lie. That's how I found out he doesn't love me. He only married me because of my family connections. The memory of finding the plans for his dude ranch and learning why made her crumble. If only he'd have asked. She'd have told him she'd walked away from her trust fund and her controlling grandfather long ago. She'd never believed in love at first sight, but she'd fallen fast and hard for the cowboy when he'd rescued her from a blizzard while she'd been shooting her Wolfpack Zero story. She'd been so in the zone she hadn't even noticed they were both about to get stranded in the snow. He'd been out checking the perimeter of his ranch on his horse when he'd come to her rescue. He'd swept her up and saved her just like an old-time cowboy, and that had been that. A whirlwind courtship followed by a quick wedding. Now she had to be strong for both of them. Pippi shook her head. You a housekeeper? Can't picture it. Sarah shrugged. How hard can it be? You mop a few floors and open a few cans? I should have enough spare time to finish the series of endangered species photos I was doing. It's the best work I've ever done, and my editor said it could lead to some prestigious work. That's just an excuse, Sarah, and you know it. You aren't responsible for ruining the cowboy any more than your mother was responsible for ruining your father. That was all our grumpy old grandfather's imagination. Can't fix the past by doing this. That's not why, Sarah noted Pippi's expression of disbelief inside. Maybe that's part of it, but the plain truth is I love the hard-headed, stubborn cowboy, and I won't see his life ruined. Somebody's sure in an all-fired hurry, boss. Rafe leaned forward in his rocker. His fatigue after a long, dusty day on the range melted as he watched the silver Jeep Cherokee kick up a plume of dust in its wake. It sped toward them down the long driveway. It's the wife. Wife? Zeke Taylor, his ranch foreman, made the word sound like a curse. I can't believe she has the guts to show her face around here after hightailing it on your wedding night. Rafe noted the sour expression on Zeke's wizened face, but ignored it. This wasn't up for debate. I want you to spread the word. She's to be treated with respect. I don't get it. The woman runs roughshod over you and you'll lay out the red carpet for her? Don't worry about it, Zeke, Rafe smiled, adding confidently. Got everything under control this time. What you plan to do, sweet talk her into sticking around? Zeke scowled and spat on the ground. Rafe shook his head, his jaw tightening. No, it'll take more than sweet talk to bind a saddle-shy filly like Sarah to my side. Don't worry. I've got her figured out, and I'll have her tied to my side before she knows it. Zeke slowly got up from the creaky rocker, slapping his battered Stetson against his leg. I hope you know what you're doing, boy. So do I. Rafe watched Zeke stomp toward the bunkhouse. He had to make this work. His future depended on it because he just plain didn't see one without her. The Jeep came to a halt amid a cloud of dust. The inevitability of the moment hit him hard. He never doubted Sarah would return one day, and when she did, he would be in control. But first, he planned to extract a little payback before they settled down to domestic bliss. She got out of the Jeep, and he swallowed the lump in his throat. Dying embers of the sun caught the golden highlights in her long red hair, turning it to molten fire. Her sigh carried to him on this cool evening breeze, and it did something to him. His heart was racing. He took a deep breath to calm down. Her scent of strawberries and butterscotch, with just a hint of something uniquely feminine, made him hungry. He could almost taste her. If he played his cards right, he would. As she walked toward him, he was struck anew by the confident way she moved. It attracted him in the first place 6 months ago when she'd come to the area to shoot a series on the Grand Teton wildlife. It was a damned fool thing to do in the dead of winter, or maybe incredibly courageous, which she was. Dealing with her was going to be a challenge, and oh, how he loved challenges. The first moment they'd met, he'd known he'd had to have her, and almost did, until she ran off screaming on their wedding night. 6 months later, he still wasn't sure what had spooked her, but he knew to put blinders on to treat a spooked filly. Instead, he put up a blinder via a small white lie. Sure, it was true there'd been unmerciful gossip, but he could take it. And yes, his expansion loan had been turned down, but there were ways to keep from selling up. He figured her sense of honor would make her come back to right a wrong, and he intended to capitalize on her integrity. He studied her as he would of any opponent. There was strength in the proud angle of her chin, and a keen intelligence in her sparkling green eyes. Rafe sat motionless in the shadows of the porch and watched her stride falter as she neared the steps. He almost felt her instinctive desire to turn tail and run as she gazed up at him. His fist tightened on the chair arm, awaiting her decision. She took the first porch step, and Rafe leaned back, letting out an imperceptible sigh. He tilted his head back, snagging her gaze as she drew near. It's mighty nice of you to come a-callin', wife. To what do I owe the pleasure of your company? She frowned, her chin rising defiantly. I can see you're not surprised to see me. Rose must have filled you in on our conversation. That's right. He kept a tight rein on his reaction as he watched the play of emotions across her expressive face, yearning for what might have been intrigue, but mostly of pain. He wanted to kick himself for having hurt her, even though he still didn't know what he'd done, why she'd run. That was the first thing he'd have to fix. So, you want to sign on as my housekeeper? Have you got any references? It's no joking matter, Rafe. She scowled at him. To put it bluntly, I've come to save your reputation. Now, do you want my help or not? He slowly got to his feet, feeling her simmering resentment, but he felt something else as well, the unrequited passion that hung between them. He walked past her, smirking at her sharp and drawn breath as he brushed by her and opened the door. Why don't we take this inside, wife? There's no need to give the hands more food for gossip. She nodded and briskly walked through, Rafe at her heels. Let's go into the study, he directed. He followed her. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft finality. Her shoulders tensed before she turned to face him, her expression enigmatic. He hastened to relieve her mind. Don't worry, there aren't going to be any tearful recriminations. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. She wrinkled her nose. That's very generous of you. As you know, I've heard about your alleged problems. I've come to offer you a deal. Do tell. He straightened and sauntered toward her. She backed away, coming to rest against his desk. Rafe caught a whiff of her scent again, strawberries and butterscotch. His mouth watered and his senses went into overload. She drew a shaky breath. The pulse flickered at the base of her throat, and he recalled how she dabbed herself with perfume there. He was ever so tempted to nuzzle that sweet spot. Brought him right back to the moment they'd met when he saved her from the blizzard. She was close to being buried in an avalanche, but she was so focused on the wolves she was taking pictures of, she'd been oblivious to the danger. He'd dismounted, scaring off the wolves, when she spun to scold him. Their eyes met, and he'd been well and truly smitten. Lone wolf, confirmed bachelor. Her pure spunk, her love of life had intrigued him. They'd both holed up in a lime cabin until the storm passed, and by then they were mated and soon married. She gulped. Yes, I've heard you've been having some problems since we split. You mean since you tore out of here on our wedding night like your tail was on fire? Closed the gap between them, put his hands on her waist, and lifted her onto the desk. She gasped, and he smiled, pleased by her response. Oh, yes, she wanted him just as much as he wanted her. He couldn't help focusing on her slightly parted lips. It brought back memories of when he'd tasted that intriguing wine. She shimmied back on the desk's surface and smoothed her skirt. Stop that. I didn't come here to be manhandled. As I said, I'm prepared to help you under certain conditions. What's in it for you? She hesitated, biting her lip. My editor has been clamoring for the series I started shooting. I could finish it in addition to my housekeeping duties. He slid his index finger along her smooth calf, drawing an outraged glower from her. She shook her hair back over her shoulder. What would it look like spread out on his pillow? That he'd never found out was one of his many regrets. He intended to rectify the errors soon. So we both win. That's generous of you, wife. Just what did you have in mind? As I said, I'll return to save your reputation. I'll fill in for Rose for the next 2 weeks, and people will assume we've gotten back together. The talk will die down. I'll finish my series, and then I can quietly slip out of town. He frowned at her eager tone. Could she dismiss him that easily? Just like that, huh? She quickly added. Of course, there can't be any intimacy between us. He shook his head. I wouldn't be too sure about that. We have a natural attraction, just like a couple of magnets. You don't love me, she glared at him. This attraction you mentioned is meaningless. What we had was just physical on your part. Sooner or later, it'll go away. He frowned as his suspicions were confirmed. So that's why you left, because I didn't give you the words? Among other things, important things, she sighed, her tone growing wistful. We won't work, Rafe. I thought a sudden break would be less painful. Sensing her vulnerability, he closed in for the kill. Because you love me. She shrugged, looking away. Don't worry about it. I'll get over it. He trapped her chin with his calloused fingers, holding her still while he studied her face. She looked as panicked as a deer caught in the car's headlights, telling him she regretted her decision to return. He could see it in her startled gaze, but he couldn't let her get away again. He didn't think he could take it if she did. It's actions that count for me. The words are meaningless, and your actions hurt me a lot. She closed her eyes. I wanted to do the right thing, but it was a mistake to come here. Sorry. He muttered a curse. Damn, he pushed her too far. He dropped his hands to his side. It wasn't a mistake. I do need your help, but under certain conditions. She opened her eyes, her expression brightening. Such as? He held up one finger. First, if you're going to give me back my reputation, it's got to look real. She nodded. Of course, within reason. He eyed her sourly. Word spread when you ran off screaming on our wedding night. People started speculating on what kind of kinky things I might have tried on you. A few even wondered whether I was over-endowed. Some tried to find out. Her mouth kicked up in a startled grin as if she'd thought of other men trying to sneak peeks at him in the restroom. She bit her lip, but a giggle escaped. After 6 months, I'm sure the talk has died down. Not in a small town like Shelbyville, especially when you coming back. The telephone lines are probably buzzing. I never thought of that. She let out a shocked grunt. He nodded. I did. As I said, it needs to look real. Her eyes narrowed. How real? Here's the deal. You move in with me for the rest of the summer. By then, the talk will have settled. That should also give you plenty of time to complete your series. He tilted his head, studying her reaction. 3 months is a lot longer than I was counting on. She scooted even further back on the desk. I can't spend the rest of the summer here. I do have a life of my own, you know. She pouted as if resigned. I guess this isn't going to work. Ever hear of a little thing called Grand Theft Auto? He asked dryly. Her head shot up and she gazed at him warily. What do you mean? He smiled. You stole my truck when you ran off. That old rattletrap wasn't worth $1,000, she scowled. That thing is held together with baling wire and string. I just borrowed it to get to the airport. Besides, you got it back, didn't you? I saw it parked in the yard. He shrugged. That's not how the sheriff saw it when I reported it missing that night. Her jaw dropped. You called the cops on me? I can't believe you would do such a dastardly thing. I wasn't exactly in a sweet, understanding mood. The nerve ticked in his jaw as he gazed at her. That night, I would have done anything to retrieve you. She frowned at him, her chin rising with defiance. It's good there's been some cooling off time in the interim. You're darned right. It's good. Otherwise, I might be tempted to turn you over my knee. She snorted. Mr. Halliday, sexist remarks like that aren't going to win my goodwill. He shrugged. That's what you get for picking an unenlightened rancher like me for a husband. Now, shall I call the sheriff? Or are you staying? She bit her lip. You wouldn't call him. Try me. You win, but you don't play fair, cowboy, she glared at him. He turned and started to walk away. I don't play at all. So when do you want this great deception to begin? He turned back a few steps away from the door. There's no time like the present. She raised an eyebrow. How can I convince people we're a real couple? He smiled triumphantly. For starters, you're going to be a perfect ranch wife, or at least as perfect as you can be with your limited abilities. You're also going to act like I'm the hottest thing in pants. That's a stretch. She ignored his disapproving glower and hopped off the desk. That brings me to item number 2, he said. You owe me a wedding night. I intend to collect. She poked his chest with her index finger. No way. There's absolutely no way I'm going to sleep with you. Rafe smiled at her like a cat with a bowl of cream. Sure you are, sweet Sarah. You want me as much as I want you. You won't be able to resist the temptation.